In the south, burning could be seen, smoke pluming into the air on this bright, still, summer's day. Osrith said nothing, just stood, fully armed, at the front of the warriors. There was no sound, no cries of indignation that the incoming army was burning buildings on the way up to them. For they had been planning for many months for an invasion. All of the farmers, all of the warriors of Berwick, had taken up the call that the harvest should be buried, that the people should evacuate. There had been no screams of panic. Osrith had been told, just calm and orderly removal to her hall. It was what she herself had been ducking under cover to ensure, having sailed south since the start of the year, to listen, to observe. And now an army was within sight. It was as big as Eswe had told her. Osrith had hoped for less, but it had not been so. And in the sea, a great armada of ships was heading north. Her fishermen had been told not to launch until they had passed. But they weren't passing, and neither was the army. What surprised Osrith, however, as she waited for the men to approach, was that Aethelstan was not leading the army. No glitter and pageantry accompanied him, as the last time he was here. Perhaps he was with the naval fleet. The coast was being ravaged, too, as many of her fishermen had told her. So, Osrith wondered, who was it then who was coming with the Englaland army in red? A brighter red livery marched with them. So, Hywel had come, with his son, Idwulf. It meant that Sindlin was subdued again. Osrith cursed herself in her mind for ever listening to Hywel, at Amont Bridge, for she could now see that by committing herself, in her spiritual role as Gwyddolf, their queen, had denounced her as traitor to Hywel, and therefore, to Aethelstan. So, Hywel then, Osrith thought, her hand on Bué. Morgan Wynfor and Tudor, of neighbouring kingdoms now part of Deheubarth, didn't they remember that they had once been independent? That they had once united against Vortigern, with their king, Archerus? Finan had sworn that Uhtred would not be with Aethelstan, who would have already stood before Bibbenberg, speaking to her brother, and Finan by his side, no doubt, as the king of Englaland demanded Uhtred's position, reminding him he was a good, loyal lord to the king of all Britain, as he came north. But, whatever had transpired, it was clear her brother had not stopped him, either. So it was Osrith, with Berwick, and her handful of loyal warriors against a host of thousands. As the line approached, Osrith strained to look at the front line. She did not recognize the leader, nor did he identify himself when Osrith called out for him to do so. Osrith, I have never commanded you, Finan had said, before leaving. But I would have you flee to Alba. And the seriousness of his face returned to Osrith's mind as she strode out to stand before the man who was clearly the warband's leader, Bué in hand. Who are you? Osrith demanded. Ealdred, said the man, his face overcome with joy. And I am at the farmstead of the bitch of a whore called Osrith. You are at the hall of the Lady of Berwick, Ealdred of ... Where? Somewhere in Wessex, with such manners as yours. But the man did not yield to her taunt, instead, smiled wider. We are to take your land, bitch, he told her. With whose army? Osrith asked. For none such a lord could command warriors such as these. And she leaned towards another of the warriors. Whence come you? Hampton, Sussex. Osrith looked over more of the warriors. I remember better-mannered Devonshire warriors when I fought, under the Lord Odder. At the name, a quick chatter filtered through the men who had heard it. Miral had been with her, and her beloved Elfrith, dead now, long dead, at Ofoik, trying to save her and her mercen men. I served the Lord Odder, and the Lord, the King Alfred, she added. I fought under your livery, at Beamflout. I helped to flee the Lady Ethelfled, when she had been taken prisoner. Did I not, Commander? She turned to Elfkin, who was lingering just behind Osrith. He had been primed for this, and called back, indeed, Lady Osrith, I helped you escape, and you had the Lady Ethelfled with you. I called back her mercen warriors. Osrith held her face impassive, waiting for the realization to occur to Ealdred that, far from being an undefended backwater, Berwick was highly defended, and that warriors loyal to her were with her. So if you believe you are going to wrest this land, this peaceful land, from my hand, Then you had better have more thoughts. You may have more men, I have more right. There was silence for a moment, and then Ealdred began to laugh. He laughed, as if he had been given a particularly amusing joke which he had only just got. "No, bitch," he called back, when his laughter had abated, and Osrith raised a hand to stop any of her men retaliating at the insult. "It is you who have got it wrong. This land belongs to Ethelistan." He surveyed the men behind her, Elfkin, with Oshir, Falkbald and Egelfrith Miral beside him, and beside him the Picts, Kaltigar, Mund, Bean, with the Alba warriors to their left, Dubkan and Senzi, with Uunst beside his son. "I fear you are under the misapprehension that you would win a fight, your dozen men and yourself," Ealdred boasted. "I have over 10,000, marching north." "Then you had better keep marching," Osrith told him, "for though I am hospitable to strangers in my land, such an amount I cannot feed nor sleep." But her words fell to nothing when she saw a man approaching, knife to his throat. It was Finan-Beak. It took a moment for Osrith to realize who the young man was, dark-haired, bearded like his father. For a moment she thought that it was her husband. The look of shock must have appeared on her face, for Ealdred laughed again. Surely not, Osrith thought again. He was supposed to be safe, with Uhtred. Had her brother let him out? Had he traded him as a hostage? "Fight me," Osrith snapped to Ealdred, as he sneered in her direction. "Fight me," she demanded, blade aloft. For, memories of Bishop Oswald, Uhtred's firstborn, gelded at the hands of Brider and Ragnall, came rushing discomfortingly to her mind. "Are you hurt?" Osrith called to her son in Gaelish. Behind her, several heads of the Albaland Pictish warriors turned. "It is a ruse, Mather," young Finan called back, also in Gaelish. "Your brother is behind us, and has set this up. He wants you to give them no reason to fight you and so have pretended to threaten me. Even now, Inglaland warriors have come ashore at Berwick, and, enough!" Ealdred snapped. "Let the boy go, for we have caught the prize we seek." And, before even Kaltigar or Elfkin could move, the man had seized Osrith and had thrown Bué onto the hard, summer earth. "Your uncle and your father are with you?" Osrith called to her son, in Gaelish, taking care not to say the name Uhtred. "Uncle wants you to be in Ethelistan's custody, to stop you reaching Alba and alerting the king," he told her, as carefully as he could, and she watched as her son was allowed to ride away. And when she turned, she could see that warriors had surrounded the back of the hall, come on the ships that were now in Berwick's harbour. But Osrith was not about to stand for that. "Don't you know who I am?" she demanded, as Ealdred dragged her arm roughly. "Don't move," she told her warriors. "Whatever happens here, I need you alive to look after my land." Elfkin, he turned to Osrith, Kaltigar, Dubkan. The Alba warriors disguised as Berwick warriors, looked to her, the young Morma wearing a doubtful expression. Osrith did not go without a fight, however, and she kicked and scratched at Ealdred as he dragged her in the direction of the harbour. "You will be going north, with the fleet, to tell them where to anchor," Ealdred told her. But Osrith was not finished, and from her thigh she brought tagged seeks, and thrust it up towards his arm. It skittered away, but not before it had done some damage. Ealdred cried out and Osrith ducked away. But it was not as she had planned. Ealdred managed to kick at her leg and she fell to the floor. Behind her, cries of insult were being exchanged by her men and those at the front of Ethelistan's army. "You're dead, bitch," Ealdred hissed at Osrith, and she felt her clothes being torn from her, until she was naked from the waist up. From near distance, Uhtred gripped Finan's arms to stop him from tearing to his wife. At the side of her hall a large barrel was sitting containing the broth from many plants that were to be used to dye this year's linen. Bundling her over to it, Osrith managed a glance behind her, and she saw that her men were surrounded. Good, she thought. Good that they had not chosen to fight. But that was the last she thought for some time, for Ealdred pushed her, head first, into the barrel, her breeches tearing as he clawed at her sword belt. "Die, bitch," he called, and it would be the last Osrith would have heard, as she began to drown in the woad broth that was foaming around her, the caustic reaction to her skin nothing compared to the liquor filling her lungs. At her, Unhimmelhoch. The words began, unbidden, in Osrith's mind as the Lord's Prayer, in English came to her. Drowned, naked, in woad in the land she loved the best. What would any writer of her time make of that as the salt sea covered her face, as the two Allied princes stood by and watched her die? Her throat choked, water filled her lungs. The blackness might have been the bottom of the barrel, or Osrith passing out. Her eyes closed, and then she felt her head being pulled up. Ealdred was smirking as he saw her face, dripping with dye, emerge from the water. "And now we go to Athelistan, bitch," he told her, pushing her roughly. "You wanted to be a Pict, and now you are one, naked, and blue. Behold." He called to those surrounding them, her warriors, her men, Beric's farmers, Athelistan's army. "Behold, the Lady of Beric, the Lord of Bibenbug's dear sister." And he reached down, still holding her hair in one hand, pulling her head back, hard as he mauled first one breast and then the other, paying close attention to her nipples with his fingers, pinching and pulling them to hardness, sucking the air in through his teeth as he did so with obvious satisfaction as he felt her up. "And what mighty fine tits you have too," he declared. "I bet you are all wet in your cunt now," he added, his breath heavy. It was the strangest thing, Osrith thought, as found the energy to bring her head back and force it against his nose, so that the Lord Ealdred reeled in pain. Buoy and tagged sword and her sword belt were no longer on the ground in front of her. They had quite gone. But Osrith lurched from Ealdred now, as the dye water that has entered her stomach came back again, and she bent double, throwing it back up. Ealdred pulled at her hair so she could not get it all up and laughed as she choked. "Have you finished?" he said. Osrith pretended she had not, pretended she was incapacitated from her drowning, which she nearly was. She made to flop down, and Ealdred sneered at her. Instead, she pulled the sword from the man, and kicked him hard in the stomach, while bringing her fist round to his nose. Ealdred writhed on the floor as he held his nose, bleeding as it was down his face, and Osrith held the man's blade high. The Pictish words that she had once learned, from the stones in the dungeon halls under Dunnottar, which she had, with patience, learned. This was her land, she declared. This was their land. They were Picts, and the incomers needed to know that. About to thrust Ealdred's own sword into his groin, her naked body now proudly displaying the battle colour of the ancient Picts, and saw their faces. Many looked away, those West Saxons and Mersons from Athelistan's army, not from her shame, but the shame that she had been assaulted. Instead of thrusting the sword into Ealdred, she threw it aside, in the direction of Falkbald, who had recently broken his own sword, and turned to her hall, calling to Caltigar to bring her fresh clothing. For while she was wearing the Pictish blue battle dye on her skin, she was, equally, naked in front of hundreds of warriors. She knew that they would never attack her. She had the power, and she was using it. Osrith called one of her men, as Finan and Uhtred looked on from near the back of one of the Englaland columns. Of course they had set up young Finan, but they did not expect such a vicious attack on her. But the call came too late. Behind Osrith, a man had appeared, had slid from his horse, and had shrouded Osrith in a thick cloak. She struggled, but the man had extended a sword. "You know something," Uhtred accused Finan. But Finan just stood there, and stared, as the man on the horse, helmeted and now trying to tie a struggling Osrith over the saddle, abducted the Lady of Beric. The Englaland warriors were too slow to act, too slow to release Osrith's men who were struggling to be released in order to help her. Caltigar had been the nearest. But the man simply turned his head and looked at the Pictish man, before kicking his stirrups into the horse's side and rode away, with Osrith tied across the saddle in front of him. 88,888,888 Osrith did not know where they were going. It was dark, and very uncomfortable, trussed up in a heavy blanket, and it rubbed her skin. From the speed the rider was going, Osrith estimated that they were heading north, for he was going fast over flat ground. And then, the horse's hooves changed sound, and now there was metal shoes over denser wood. They had just crossed the pack-horse bridge that spanned the two-eyed. The horse had stopped, and Osrith tried to wriggle, so that she might fall on the floor. But a hand on her back stopped her from moving. She tried talking, but her throat was sore from the woad mixture and, even if it hadn't been, Osrith doubted he would be able to hear her. But she could smell smoke, the smell of burning. Wriggling still further, Osrith managed to see a little through a tiny gap in the blanket. The bridge was on fire. If any of her warriors were following her, they would be too late, for there was no way across the deep, wide two-eyed for miles. She struggled, but it was some miles north until the rider stopped, and helped Osrith down from the back of the horse. Osrith readied to raise her fist as soon as she could, as the blanket fell from her. She was naked, and the blanket had absorbed any of the moisture still on her. She blinked, the caustic solution burning her eyes, but she still could not see properly. It might be the woad. She heard a familiar voice say to her, "It may have hurt your eyes. You're not supposed to take a bath in it, Osrit." And she sat there for a moment, aware that she knew the voice. After a few moments, the blanket wrapped around her again. She felt a hand take hers. Domhnall. She tried. I, Domhnall MacDuineal laughed. "And I've never seen such a thing. You would have fought that shite of a man, even after what he did to you." "Well, you didn't give me a chance, did you?" Osrith snapped back. Her words sounded harsh, but there was light relief in her chest. How he ever had been there, she wondered, for Osrith knew she would have fought the man, naked, woad-painted, as her ancestors, and defeated him too. There was word that there was a great host, Domhnall told her. Her eyes seemed to be recovering a little, and at least now, in the bright sunshine Osrith could make out vague shapes, such as the landscape line, such as where the sun would be. "How do you feel?" "Angry," Osrith told him. And that was all she was prepared to admit. As well as the burning she all over from the woad, she also felt frightened about what was happening in her land. What orders the leader, Ealdred had had from Athelstan. "I do not have any clothes for ye," Domhnall admitted. "But you can wear the blanket until we get to Constantine." "Back to Dunnottar?" Osrith asked. "But that's miles." "Even further," Domhnall told her. "I am taking you to him, to Constantine, as he bade me." God knows it took a lot of devilish skill to get past all of Athelstan's bastard ships, but it seems I got there in time. But how did he know? Osrith thought. How would Domhnall, or Constantine, come to that, know where she was? It was a question for another time, for others were more pressing, and Domhnall had answer for them all. "I'm alone," he told her. "And, if you will let me, I can help you bathe in yon burn in the mountains there." "So we are going north, and we are beyond Melrose?" Osrith asked, suddenly self-conscious that Domhnall had offered to help her. "Washington. You need to get all of the dye from you." "Is it just the two of us?" Osrith asked, looking in the vague direction of Domhnall, and could just make out the shape of his head, long hair past his neck, the shape of his shoulders. "Oh he told her cheerfully, "just me, and ye, and 3,000 Alba warriors." And when he saw her mouth fall open, Domhnall burst into laughter. "Nay, just tha Thursday Agus Thami," he told her. "We are quite alone. I will try not to look upon you," he added. It was not as if he had not seen her naked before. The last time that someone had tried to drown her had been the last time, tied naked to a rock so that the tide would come in over her head. But it had been not Constantine, but Domhnall who had pulled her free, had bundled her into a cloth and carried her back to Doia, to Muir, to recover from her ordeal. She wondered whether Domhnall was remembering it too, because, as he helped her into the burn, throwing the blanket away from her, he said, "I will only look as much as I have to." And she ducked down into the water, Domhnall's hand still in hers, the cool water over her body. "I have some weeds here," he told her. "Doc." "That should work," she told him, and Domhnall handed them to her, splashing out of the way. The dock soothed her skin and she ducked under the water, emerging, but still not being able to see much. "I cannot reach my back," she told Domhnall, small stones getting between her toes, and it itches. And Domhnall stripped to his shirt and breeches before getting in with her and smoothing the soothing dock over her body. When he pushed my head into the water, Osrith said when Domhnall had finished. I know, Osrit, he soothed. Aethelstan is coming north, and Constantine knows it. So, would ye hurry now that we get there before him? Domhnall gently helped Osrith out of the small stream before wrapping her body in his cloak and helping her up onto his horse. I think I am starting to see more now, Osrith told her friend, although she hadn't much faith in her own words. Good to know, Domhnall told her. He saw a glimpse of Osrith's shoulder as the cloak slipped down her back. You know, your skin is still blue, and your hair, he told her, it looks as if it is going green. For a few moments there was silence between them, only the clip-clip of the horse's hooves on the dry earth. Osrith laughed, and couldn't help but carry on, and soon Domhnall was laughing too. I really thought I would die today, she told him. And that shit of an Ullaid did not come to help you, Domhnall returned. Do you want your marriage to end? Domhnall asked suddenly. Osrith shook her head. No, she said, and put her hand on Domhnall's. No, I wanted peace. I thought Aethelstan would give us that, and Finan is happy serving my brother to his cause. Aethelstan is happy. Constantine is not. He has his own grandfather's dream to fulfill every bit as much as Aethelstan. And I asked you what you wanted, Domhnall reminded her, gently. Osrith said nothing for a time. I don't know, honestly, she told him. Nothing for myself, but for the people I care for to be content. All of them. For my brother to never bother me again. For Finan Beeg, and I and Finan to be a family and peaceable neighbors to Constantine and whoever is south of us, and, but Osrith broke off as Domhnall pulled her back against him and wrapped his arms around her. Not the Queen of the Henoled? He asked. You know that what you said at Bergam to Hywel may have influenced his decision to ride with Aethelstan? Osrith suspected that she may very well had. What I want is my husband beside me, and our son together. And I suspect that's what he wants too, Domhnall told her. You still love him? Still? Osrith repeated. I have always loved him, ever since Winchester. And yes, despite everything. And I suspect the Ullaid bastard feels the same, Domhnall told her. Who do you think compelled me to kidnap you, if not to take you to a place of safety? And, as they rode further and faster north, Domhnall told her the whole story, about how Trinity had been escorted to Bebbanburg for a friendly chat with Finan. Alternatively, I could have spoken to Utad, and chats with your brother are never friendly. So they devised a plot that involved Finan Beeg, which was to get your attention. Unfortunately, that slime shitty Aldred tried to drown you. But Osrith was no longer listening. Her heart was sore knowing that Finan had deemed the safest place for her to be was in Alba. Finan Beeg had never been in any real danger. Oh, how she loved him, and, whether she would regain her sight or no, Osrith was determined to be with the man she loved once more. Of course I love him, Osrith told Domhnall, as held onto her tightly. How could she not? She closed her eyes, which seemed to soothe them, and the image of his face appeared in her mind, and for the first time in her life she just wanted to run off to find him, beg him to stay with her. I know you do, Osrit, Domhnall said softly by her ear, I know you do.